I've been hearing a lot of comparisons between police homicides and lynchings lately, with everything that's been happening in the United States and the protests around the world now. And as many of you know from watching other videos, I was a police officer, and now I conduct research on police use of force. And while I was a police officer, I used deadly force. So I committed a police homicide, and it has made me wonder, was I taking part in like a modern lynching? So in this video, I just want to explore that a little bit. Was that something that I was taking part in? And what are some of the similarities and some of the differences between police homicides and lynchings? And why do people make that comparison so often? And why is it important to society and important that we be aware of the similarities and why those similarities exist and why people mention them as we move forward and process this as a country, as a society? If you guys are finding these useful, please subscribe. The more people that subscribe, the more people that see the video. So I'm just going to move right into it. Some of the things I'm talking about is drawn from literature, things I've read, and I'm going to put a link or in the description with an author that lays out a lot of the ideas that I talk about here. So there's this thing called prerogative power. It's like a form of power where, so think about like the president of the United States can pardon somebody. That's a form of prerogative power. There's no like sort of formal process, law, trial that takes place. It's this person who has this special power that they can pardon somebody. Another type of prerogative power is a lynching. So this is like, think about black men in the South, all over the United States, but especially we think of the South. That's like this lynching where a person is a mob of people or a few people decide this person deserves to die. They made the decision. There's no trial, and they execute this person. It's this is what a lynching is. It's this prerogative power, this expression of power. Policing, when a police officer kills somebody, so I killed someone at work, I made the decision to shoot that person, knowing that shooting somebody could kill them. I made the decision that based on this person's behavior, they are trying to kill me, and I'm going to shoot them knowing that I could kill them because I made the decision that in that moment, my life was more important than their life. That sounds maybe crude, but that's what the reality is. I made the decision that my life, my partner's life, there was a victim there, that I'm going to place a higher value on my own life than this person. And I made that decision. That was a prerogative power. Like I was making a life and death decision over another human being. So there's a lot of similarities in the nature of the power being expressed when lives are taken in a lynching or in a police shooting. There's a lot of similarities. So when people who have witnessed we have this long history of prerogative power being exercised by groups of people against black men in our society and women, but we think of young black men being executed by a mob of people, and then black people especially. I don't know. I can't get my head fully around what it must be like, but I would imagine, I'm trying to put myself in that position. I can understand what it's like to be an officer, but I'm trying to imagine, given all of the history, if I were to watch what I witnessed in Minnesota as this white man making a decision to execute, to exercise their power over this other person's life, minus any type of official proceeding or process, or this individual that was murdered had no George Floyd had no process. It was a prerogative power, and it was this white person exercising that power. And there's this history with lynchings of either police officers being complicit, facilitating, or being actively involved and participating in these lynchings of young black men, mostly young black men, but women as well. And so it just opens up an historical wound in a population that is not just arbitrarily, this is not an arbitrary connection. They're very, very similar expressions of power. They're different. There are differences in this particular case, with what happened to George Floyd. It looked a hell of a lot like a lynching to me. I mean, I think it's very, very accurate to say that that was a modern lynching. There are other police shootings that I would argue are nothing like lynchings, where a police officer makes a decision to protect their life or somebody else's life, and there's reason that they did it, and they're well-intentioned. I think in most cases, the vast majority of the cases, and I've researched thousands of these, that's what's happening. Someone's scared and they're fearful, like scared shitless for their life, and they make a decision to protect it. That's what happens. But there are other instances where that's not the case, and this one is just so shocking and such a vivid example of a modern lynching, because I can't help but say that's what it is. But in policing, there are killings that like the ultimate taboo in our society. I shouldn't say that I don't know. It's a subjective thing, but I think of it as one of like an ultimate taboo. We're told thou shalt not kill. It's always one of the first statutes when a society is organized and they have laws. It's something that we prohibit because it's destructive to the people that it happens to their loved ones, to the people that do the killing. So we try to prohibit it as much as possible as we organize. Not always as much as possible, but ideally we would try to limit as much as possible. And in most societies, we see mechanisms to try to control it. But it's something that states continue to do. And it's the fullest expression of state power, is exercising this prerogative power to take a life from a member of the body politic from the population, and to take that life as like this, and to be able to do it and to justify it and not turn heads when you do it, means that you have a strong state that's able to do that. They're able to justify it. It's seen as something that's legitimate. They're expressing their power. It's viewed as legitimate. It shows the strength of a state as far as I'm concerned anyway. But when a state can't justify it and it engages in that activity, it can be very problematic and damaging to the trust between the population and the state. So that I have noticed, and this is just me watching, and when I observe these officer-involved homicides, police homicides, I see the state engaging in, and this is mentioned about other forms of prerogative killings in the book that I'll cite down at the bottom, is that the state will, with these homicides, when I've gone through a few thousand of these, reading accounts, and I pay a lot of attention to them, and I'll see the state trying to do two things, and that's argue that it wasn't a homicide, that it wasn't technically a homicide, and that the person who was killed was not somebody worth celebrating. So by showing that it wasn't a homicide, the state, the police, like a police department, and we'll see this with, maybe we won't see this with the George Floyd incident, but with controversial police killings, you will see the state rely on policy, say like this was procedurally correct, or justifiable homicides, where like the example where I think, oh yeah, that was a legitimate thing for the officer to do. The agency and the officer will say, when I was relying on this technique, I was following policy, I was trying to act as an officer, it wasn't me exercising this prerogative power to take this life or engage in activity that was likely to end a life. I was really acting as an agent of the organization, and it takes away the responsibility from the officer, and it turns it into some sort of state process. It's not like this homicide, and I'm working my head around these ideas, so this is not perfectly expressed. But I feel as though that as a way to justify these expressions of prerogative power of police officers killing a citizen, that they will just try to argue that it was a procedural thing, it wasn't a murder, it was a police homicide, but it was legitimate. There was the officer responded, the guy pulled out a gun as an example, and I would argue that is legitimate. Points a gun at me, I'm going to shoot him. I don't want to get shot and get killed. But that is a way to justify what happened. And then the other thing is to make the person somebody not worth celebrating is, you'll notice that after an incident, that in public discourses, so like publicly, there will be talking about, well, this person had this long criminal history. They had drug use, they had family problems, they had all of these types of things. And then there are sort of these private discourses where amongst the officers, because the officers, police officers at a precinct, someone was killed by one of their officers, they will talk about it privately about, oh, well, this guy was this. Oh, I heard this about him. I heard this might explain why he did this or that. And it's trying to create these narratives that say this person wasn't somebody worth celebrating. This is somebody that, based on their past behavior, is just this terrible type of person. And so I think what we'll see is with George Floyd is they'll try to say, if the people are trying to like say this isn't a modern lynching, they would say, well, the officer was trying to do this neck restraint, even though this when you look at read the policy, I read the policy, and what he was doing is nothing anywhere a million miles from being in policy. It was a murder, you know. But they will say, well, he was trying to do this. He was trying to do this. This type of neck restraint with his leg, but he did it wrong. He did it for too long. But he was trying to stay in policy and act as an officer, to take responsibility away from the suspect and to place it on the organization. And then I think you'll also see people talk about, well, what was George? You know, did he have a history? Had he been arrested? Did he do drugs? Did he have cannabis in his system? You know. It doesn't matter. What I saw, like, George Floyd could have gone in and shot up a school and come out, and once those officers had him in handcuffs on the ground with his hands behind his back, it's over. There's no fight. There's no reason to be putting your knee on someone's neck. But they'll try to, you know, denigrate somebody's memory as a way to justify what happened. And for nefarious reasons, that will happen with like this George Floyd, to justify a murder. But also if you engage in a legitimate use of force, so say an officer is out and someone comes out and points a gun at them and cranks off a couple rounds, and the officer gets shot and returns fire, and the bad guy dies, and those officers are going to talk about that guy and say he was a bad person, he did this, here's his history, and as a way to explain what he did, and also to make the people who engaged in the homicide feel better, because they're trying to reintegrate people back into society after violating this incredible taboo. So I know this might have been a little rambling, but I've been hearing this idea that police homicides are lynchings, and I think there's a lot to it, and I think that a lot of them are, not a lot of them are. This one was, and it doesn't take many, given the history. I mean, just recently celebrated the anniversary of Tulsa, where Americans flew planes over black neighborhoods and bombed them. That happened not that long ago. It was like 101 years. I'm sorry if I got the number of years wrong, but that happened not too far away from where I live right now, to people who could have had conversations. Like, there are people alive today who had conversations with people who experienced that and remembered it. You know, like, this is not a million years ago. This is something that happened recently. So given the connection between these types of deaths and the history, this violent history of the United States, and the connection of law enforcement to lynchings in the past, this totally makes sense that people would make this connection. And it's troublesome, and it should be for everybody, including police officers. And thank you. So thank you very much. It's kind of sometimes this stuff's a little difficult to talk about and a little difficult to think about and hear. So I appreciate you guys sticking with me and working through these issues. If anyone has any questions or ideas or anything, hit me up in the comments or hit me up on Twitter, Thomas Owen Baker, at Thomas Owen Baker. And please subscribe. The more people that subscribe, the more people that get to see these. And I want as many people to see this as possible. So thank you.